Don't improvise. Yeah, I just totally fucked all of that up, didn't I? We should all have beer tiki posture. Hello, Hopheads, and welcome to the Shed and to another episode of Evenstar's Parade of Pump Clips, where we take a look at what I've been drinking in the pub over the last week. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. First up, we have Cafe Phoenix from Welsh brewer Brains. This is a dark red beer. It was sweet and creamy up front, predominantly vanilla with a coffee taste in the middle, and it finished very boozy with a very coffee liqueur flavor. Very pleasant. Not my usual thing, but I actually enjoyed this one. You know that I'm not a big fan of very dark, sweet beers, but I actually quite enjoyed this one. One to sip with perhaps a good shortbread, or enjoy with ice cream even. You know, dessert beer. It's a thing. Next up, we've got Heart and Soul from Yorkshire-based Vocation Brewery. This was a tap-poured ale rather than being a pulled ale, which is, just for your reference, most of the beers I review on here are pulled cask ales. And at some point, I will probably be doing a video for the benefit of what seems to be pretty much the rest of the world outside of the UK, because they don't know the joy of the pulled pint. I've never seen it anywhere else outside of the United Kingdom. Back to the beer. This was a faintly cloudy gold ale. Lovely, bitter, sort of resinous dankness that you get with that sort of ultra hops IPA style. No sweetness at all. Very lemon and grapefruit flavors. A hint of almost red fruit, like raspberry in the middle, but a really, really bitter edge. It seems that this sort of ultra-hopped IPA style is starting to saturate some of the UK market. It's a very popular style of beer. It seems to be everywhere, and you see more and more of them at especially the chain pubs, which is where I had this one. I had this at a Nicholson's pub. They tend to get in more of the tap-poured, trendy beers. The reason people keep putting on these kinds of beers is that, we just keep drinking them. We love them for some reason. Definitely for a younger generation of craft beer drinker, I think, as opposed to the older generation, here in the UK anyway, where the predominantly cask, small, independent brewers make ale for sort of an older generation of beer drinkers that are used to drinking, with the English bitter. Maybe it's that sort of fruity Elco poppiness that, kind of appeals to the younger generation. I don't know. What do you think? Have we reached peak IPA? Let me know in the comments below. So next, we travel south for Staffordshire brewer Limestone and a beer called Stone the Crows. And, I do love the beer pun. Many of their beers incorporate some sort of stone pun because they are based in the town of Stone. Yes, there is a town of Stone. I have been there in Staffordshire. This is a dark brown ale, very fruity and yeasty, very sort of savory yeasty. But there's some fruitiness in there, strawberry and apricot once you get kind of past the yeastiness. It was a medium bitter, so not like that really sharp bitter bite that you get with sort of lighter beers. This was more of a definitely more of a traditional English bitter, sort of a medium bitter. And at the back there was kind of a buttery sweetness, like coffee ice cream. That was interesting. I don't know if it was just the mood I was in at the time, but I thought it would go with like a nice juicy cheeseburger. Now we have yet another one-off special from Essex brewer Mighty Oak. Mighty Oak, as you've probably seen in my previous Parade of Pump Clips, they put out 12 new beers every year that they only make once. So if you don't get to try it then, you'll never get to try it. Horse Sense is one of this year's one-offs. If you're interested in this concept of the one-off beer, I will try to remember to put a link to my previous Pareto Pump clips, as I said, where I go into a bit more detail about this. This beer was a light brown ale, very toasty bitter flavors. I found it quite interesting. It was earthy, with the kind of sort of that, what I call that farmyard tang. In the middle it was a bit less bitter, with a touch of honey and orange, very nice. And then it finished with more savory herbals like sage and parsley. And last up we have Magnum IPA from large Cheshire brewer Robinsons, or Robbies, as the locals up there refer to them. This was a clear gold beer. Nowhere near as sexy as its namesake or as exotic as the Pump Clip might promise. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad beer. It was quite drinkable, but just a bit blah. Other than being sort of generically lightly hoppy, I struggled to find any kind of particular flavor profile. And this is kind of typical of a Robinsons or Robbie's beer. I used to spend quite a lot of time up in the north in that area, Cheshire, Derbyshire area, and I got to try just about every Robbie's beer going. They own a lot of pubs up there, a lot of real estate up there, and their beer is just everywhere. I know that, you know, I just know that, you know, Robbie's beer is going to be a little bit underwhelming, and even though I knew this was a Robbie's beer, I just wanted a picture of the Pump Clip, and I won't take a picture of a Pump Clip unless I try the beer, because that's just not how you play the game. It was an interesting experiment on branding, though, because it seems like the UK seems to be, as I said before, the only place where beer is pulled by pump, hence the term Pump Clip. It also seems like this piece of branding paraphernalia is not really known anywhere else in the world. You'll get the tap badges. I guess an equivalent would be, you know, the fancy tap handle. I mean, have you ever tried a beer simply because the Pump Clip or the tap handle was a bit novel? I know I have. Was it any good? Like, what was it? Was it any good? Tell us in the comments. Yeah. I'm invariably disappointed by novelty Pump Clip beers because it is generally only the bigger brewers, you know, like Robinsons, that can actually afford to put them out. A Pump Clip to produce for all the pubs that you distribute to is a pricey branding exercise, and the big brewers, of course, they kind of serve a different market that wants a standard, rather blah beer, and it's for the traditional older generation of pub goers. At least here in the UK, that still seems to be the standard operating model. However, more and more brewers are kind of realizing that young people who don't drink their beers now are not going to grow up to be middle-aged beer drinkers who drink their beer. And it's those middle-aged beer drinkers now, you know, middle-aged and a bit older. I kind of fall out of that demographic. I'm an unusual sort of outlier for craft beer consumption in the UK. They're starting to experiment, mostly with branding, but also some of them are starting to put out more interesting beers to go with that branding, which, if you know anything about business or product management, you know you kind of have to do that kind of pivot to survive when your market starts changing. I'm not talking like cutting edge, like barrel-aged bullshit stuff, you know, that, but, you know, stuff that has some sort of flavor profile. This was a bit of a fail for Robbie's because it used a pop cultural reference that is probably only familiar to sort of an older middle-aged generation. Now, I'm not sure, and they're going to connect with that, and the beer was just sort of that sort of bland, bitter, real ale end of the spectrum, so the jury is kind of still out on whether the UK is going to succeed in getting a younger generation into craft beer. We're still firmly into what we refer to as, like, real ale, even though the manufacturing looks like what you'd call craft beer in other places, small independent brewers. The market landscape is very different in how it's sold and marketed and distributed. I think to a lot of other places that are going through their craft beer boom. You know, even in Europe, Canada, the United States, very different, and a lot of small brewers are kind of failing to recognize that and pivot. You know, we're having more taxation coming in, there's more regulation is closing pubs, and when there are sort of big opportunities for diversification in especially your distribution, when your main venue for distribution, which is the traditional British pub, is starting to disappear. If you look at how many, many small brewers in North America especially are surviving and thriving without the benefit of the pub for distribution, it sort of becomes more obvious that you don't need that venue to thrive in the industry. There's more than enough room here in the UK, I think, for disruption, but there's still a failure on the buyer end of the market. Restaurants and entertainment venues, sort of the distribution buyers that I'm talking about here, to see the value of stocking more interesting beer for their customers. But then again, that comes down to sort of a failure in the industry here to bring in younger beer drinkers that they can actually sell, more interesting craft beer to. Like me, who I make choices about where we eat out, because of the beer that they sell. We will not go to a place because, they don't sell something nice to drink with the food. I don't care how good the food is. If there's not something nice to drink with it, what's the point? But then again, that's kind of down to the brewer to demonstrate the value and show the new market that they need to change in how they think about beer and its consumers. There are a few brewers now who are starting to recognize this change, in that to survive, they kind of can't keep relying on the pub as the main distribution method. They have to look elsewhere to get their product out there, and they have to pivot on their core market to create more demand from more consumers, because, as your traditional market ages out, if you're not replacing that with something, you're not going to survive as an industry. If you create more demand from consumers, that will translate into more value for more different kinds of distributors, like franchise restaurants, where you cannot get decent beer these days. So on that cheery note, that's it for this week's Parade o' Pump Clips. If you enjoyed that, especially my kind of rambling commentary on the craft beer industry here in the UK, please give me and Beer Tiki a thumbs up and subscribe for more stuff from the world of British craft beer. Until next time, I'm Evenstar, you're in the sheds, and this is the Beer in Review.